Alright, so I'm going to redo the video with the term in video editing is outtakes. Outtakes are where I'm going to cut in the code into the previous video so you can actually see how the code comes together for assignment 3. And the reason that I'm doing this is because the explanation seems to be very opaque without actually adding in the code. So let's start over here with, first of all, I am in, what directory am I in? I'm in S2110, 4010, A03, assignment 03, B server CLI. And the file that I'm editing is cli.go. And down here about line 185, we've got this send funds transaction that has, here's where you replace code and take out this inspector send funds transaction. And I'm actually going to name that 2, and we're going to go build this function. But this function really does what is in here. So up here, I am going to start out with right here at the top of this function, because it returns all the stuff. You'll notice that this function also has assignment 4. This piece, validate signature, is assignment 4. So this is really where we're going to spend a lot of time. Validate signature has not been implemented either. Right now it just returns true if you go look at it. So this piece right here with the pseudocode is what we're going to build. And we'll go over here and we'll just make this new function with the same name. It returns the same things. We don't really have to test this piece. And this is the piece we're going to replace. Now, what did I call that thing? There it is. We got to name it the same because it's getting called in the other one. You probably just want to delete that and just put it right in line. I'm doing it this way because this is a demo for you guys. All right. Now, calculate the total value using this function. All right, now where is that function? It's in CC, which means it would have been in the same package as we were just in. And if I go find it, here's something that calls it show balance. Okay, well that would make sense. If you have an account and you want to get the balance of the account, you need to do that. And here is the function. Okay, what does it do? Okay, the first question is, it goes out and it calls this, or it looks in this data structure. Block index, find value, adder index. And it indexes it with the account that you're interested in, converted from binary to a string. So whatever happens with the account, it's converting that to a string. So that's how it does the index. Now, if there's an index and it's going to use these and get the unused outputs, then it says that we need the sum of the unused outputs, and it's going to iterate over that value. And when it iterates over the value, okay, here's an assert that says something about how the value works. I'm going to ignore that for the moment. It's going to go out to, in the same data structure, all the blocks. That means it must have access to all the blocks at that moment in memory. And it's going to use the block index. The block index is what position of the block in an array or a slice. And it says if the TXs are not nil, well, that means that you could have a block with no transactions in it. So if it has transactions, there's some other sort of assert to verify it works right. And it says, I want to get the actual TX, which it uses the TX offset. So each transaction has an array of TXs in it, and it's going to look at the outputs. Okay, if it has outputs from that transaction. So you could actually have transactions that have no outputs, and some sort of an assertion, and the outputs, it gets the output, and looks at the output position, has some assertion about the output position, and then it adds up the amount. So this basically is using a bunch of array indexes to go out to this thing and add up all the amounts. Okay, so there's this index. Now, what does this index look like? If we go over in the main program, and there's generally two different kinds of testing that you do in development. One of those is unit testing, and if we go look at something like block, and this is where I'm at, is bserver block, and we see that we have a block test. And block test does some sort of things with initializing a block, serializing blocks. Okay, it does a bunch of, these are unit tests. Okay. But if we look in the main, we find out that, yes, here we have something that's at the level of a integration test. So if we look in the make file, and, people have gotten on Windows two different results for this, so there may be some differences in hash values that I have not yet traced. I have not gone back on my Windows system. I get the same results that I do on Linux and Mac, but one person did get some different results for a hash. I'm still looking at that and trying to figure out why. But in here we have test01. What does it do? It builds something. It makes certain we have a data directory. It cleans up a data directory. A bunch of removes. Then it creates a test genesis block. And there's probably some reasons why it's a test genesis block to make it consistent with the previous tests. And then it does diffs to see if we got the same results as we did in this reference directory. That means in the reference directory, there's got to be some files that have information in it that is like what we've seen before. Okay, and then it goes out and it removes everything, and it does a test genesis block again, and then it does something that tests block read and block write at the level of the entire program. And again does diffs after it's written that block to make certain that it got the same thing. Now the way make works is if you return an error somewhere in this, it quits, so the only way it can get down here to the echo and say pass is if all of those diffs worked, if all the files were the same. Okay, now that's an integration test. And then down here we've got a comment that says setup for second test. Transfer between accounts. Okay, and a second piece in second test. Now the reason why somebody would split this in a makefile into two pieces is they've got a setup and they've got a second thing that you can run multiple times. So after you've run SF0, that's the setup, you can sit here and run this. And what does it do? It says, it shows the balance of two accounts. Okay, sticks that in some files. Sends some funds. Okay, that must be the set of things that it's going to send, and it sends, we'd have to go look at what the options are, but it looks like it sends from, I would bet, given two addresses in our system, that it's sending from stuff from one address to another. That 33 would be an amount. There's some X's in there. They're probably not used yet. And it says TX memo. That's, I bet, the memo. Okay, this looks useful. And then it gets the amounts afterwards. Now, we know that if you're getting the amounts before and afterwards and you sent 33, then one account must go down by 33 and the other one must go up. And then it does this script, validate balance. Well, if it's looking for before and after, it must have some way of comparing those balances in this output file. So let's look at what this validate balance script, shell script, does. That would be useful. Oh, it does some sort of goofy things with cat and awk to pull out a field value. And then it does before equals total, else fail. Okay. I'm not that familiar with awk. It's probably something I'd have to look up. But you get the general idea that it's got a 4 with a before balance, a $2, which is the second parameter, wherever that is the change in balance. And afterwards, it's $3 is afterwards. Huh. Well, this is kind of a mystery, but certainly it looks like a thing that would compare two values. Okay. Wonder if there's any of these output files. And oh, here's a output file with some amount and a before output that has different by a certain amount. Okay, so these output files have a column that has amounts in it, and we pass in an amount that we're changing. Okay, so that looks just downright useful, and since it says you can run it multiple times, I bet you can send 33 each time from one account to another. Alright, so we've got some tests and we know how to test this thing. Now this send funds, let's go find that in the main and see where it calls it. Send funds to from account, and it gets this test send funds. I guess that's a flag. If it's test send funds, it does test send funds. I wonder where that guy is. And let's go find test send funds. Well, that would make sense. It's back in CLI. Test send funds. Length of argument 7. Okay, that's good to know. There's supposed to be 7 arguments. I guess there is in that makefile. It reads the global config. It pulls off. It must parse arguments 0 and 1 to be a from address and a to address. That's kind of what we expected. The amount, it parses as an integer, amount 64. So I guess it's probably parsing a 64-bit integer. Checks for errors that is an integer, and if not, gives us an error. It converts the amount as a 64-bit integer to just an integer. That's a typecast. If the amount is less than 0, doesn't allow that, so you can't send and give yourself money by just transferring negative amounts. Creates a new empty block. And it does this send funds transaction with all these parameters. That looks like the function we're supposed to be implementing in this assignment. Says if there's an error, it was unable to transfer the amount, and it does append tx to block. So when it gets done building a transaction, it's just tacking it onto the block and whatever an append block is. So in the context of running this thing, it apparently appends a block to the chain. And the comment says, write out updated index and block. So at the end of this stuff, it's all written for us. Now, if we go back to main, we know from looking at the makefile and how the test is, that the results are in data. Okay, I see what looks like a genesis block, a test write block, and an index. Let's go edit those things and see what's in them. And okay, this looks like what I'd expect in JSON for a block. It's got index 0, that would make it the genesis block. It's got, and I'm going to turn off spelling so we can actually read these things. Apparently it thinks that 0x09 something is spelled incorrectly. I can understand that in a certain sort of way. Alright, and the description. What's the description? It says Genesis block. That would be our marker for it being a Genesis block. And it has a previous block hash, as you expect in a Genesis block. There is nothing there. So you look at this and you go, okay, it's got some sort of a nonce. I guess it had to do 15,000 trips around the mining algorithm to get a seal that has 4 zeros. Okay, that's reasonable. And it has a Merkle hash for this. All right, so it hashed everything, and it has a transaction to some account with, since this is a Genesis block, it would have no inputs because it is the beginning. There is no inputs before this. And the outputs are to this account kind of thin. It's got the account number, but 0 amount. I guess that's where you start. And it says the comment is the mining reward. So I guess in the Genesis block, the person who did the mining didn't even get a reward, which I guess that's okay. We started with 0. There is some merit to the beginning of all of this being 0. But we looked at this, and here is the test write block, which makes some kind of sense. It did something when it did test write block. Apparently it passed a test. And here's what's in our indexes. We have one that says index, and it has a hash. And it's an array. And if you think about it, you'd like to have an way in the code to go from position to the hash of a block, so you can read in the blocks. All right. Maybe that's what that is. I'd have to go look in the code. So it's an array that's indexed by integers. That would be position to block. Okay, now there's a block hashed index. What would be a block hashed index? It has the hash, which, yeah, we can see the hash, and it says it's at position 0. And we were just looking at the block, and that looks like the hash for that block. So this is a means by which in our index to go from the hash back to the position. That makes some kind of sense. This adder data, it has nothing in there. I don't know what that is. And find value. Well, that looks like the kind of an index that's going to look up values as in unspent amounts. So find value, adder index, some sort of a hash. That looks like an account by length. So for that account, it has, that is the same hash. So I guess it, in each account, it includes its own account, which seems kind of odd at the surface value, but there may be some reason why you end up with an account, but you need to know where it is in the index. Okay. And then there's a value, and it says that this account has an entry at, well, there's only 0 blocks,